it is time for paper presentation for ICA Food Writing Prize 2025, where food meets literature meets industry. This year, we invited papers under the theme Rivers of Milk, India's tradition of milk in dairy, and we received multiple entries for this. Out of all those, we chose 10 full-length papers, and they were selected by our very accomplished first esteemed panel of judges who comprised Ms. Ruth D'Souza Prabhu, independent and feature journalist and a food writer, Ms. Avantika Bhuyan, who is an editor with Mint Lounge, Ms. Shamin O'Brien, who is an author, and Ms. Priyadarshini Chatterjee, who is a food writer and an independent journalist. Out of these 10 papers are yet another accomplished second panel of judges who include Dr. Krishnendu Ray, Professor of Food Studies at the New York University, Dr. Colin Taylor Sane, author and a renowned publisher, and Ms. Tanushri Bhaumik, who is also co-founder for Indian Culinary Agenda and an accomplished writer. They were our second panel of esteemed judges. So for the panel and discussion, we have Ms. Shamin O'Brien, who will be moderating the session. I invite ma'am to please take her place on the dais. So Shamin is a food writer and historian of global repute with multiple books to her name. She is the author of World Food, New Orleans, and was awarded a Harry A. Bell Grant from the International Association of Culinary Professionals in 2001. She was part of the team that set up Symposium of Australian Gastronomy in Sydney. And our three finalists for ICA Food Prize are Ms. Kurchika Nath, who is a doctoral candidate at Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. Kurchika, please join us on the dais. So when not immersed in research, Kurchika enjoys reading, cooking, or spending time with her pet. Her work delves into the nuanced roles that food plays in constructing selfhood and social dynamics. Second, we have Sonakshi Srivastava. Sonakshi, please join us. She is a senior writing tutor at Ashoka University and the translations editor at Usawa Literary Review. She was shortlisted for the Food Lab residency at Serendipity Arts Foundation. Her food writings have appeared in various magazines. She is interested in food pedagogies and actively teaches workshops on food writings and zines. Last, we have Mr. Vinayak Mehta. He is a filmmaker and visual storyteller. Vinayak, please join us on the dais. A master's graduate in filmmaking from AJK MCRC Jamia Millia Islamia. He works across film, installation, and digital media, examining the intersections of identity, memory, and perception. He has assisted in documenting artworks by Shanti Dave, Bireswar Sen, and Edwin Lord Weeks for the Delhi Art Gallery under National Award-winning director Sudesh Unniraman. His diverse experience spans collaboration with Amazing Race Australia and renovations with Disney Plus Hotstar. So over to you, Sharmeen.
Hello, everybody. I'll just tell you how we're going to work, and then I'm just going to take a few minutes of your time to just tell a little story to contextualise this. Each of the panellists will have 15 minutes to present. We're running a bit late, so we're not going to have questions here, but we're going to coffee immediately afterwards. So I encourage you to, if you've got a question, to write it down and then speak to the panellists when we're having coffee. I'm sorry that means we won't be sharing all your questions, but we have got a bit behind in time. So I'm just going to say something about my own work, but just bear with me because it's to create a context for this. So I have been coming to India now this is my third decade of coming to India, of observing, researching and writing about India's food history and food culture and food. In 2013, I published a book called The Penguin Food Guide to India, in which I covered the food of every state of India. Now, that book was 170,000 words. It took me years to make it. It was scratching the surface. You would need a set of encyclopedias to cover India's unbelievably diverse food. Now, my interest in food is because it is such a complex subject. I'm not necessarily a recipe writer, which is what people think of when they think you're a food writer. I'm interested in all the things that get food onto your plate. The what's on your plate, to my mind, is like it's the end of a very long chain. So I'm really interested in the complexity of food. So what I love about coming to this, and also there's been an explosion of writing about India's, regional food, community food, in India. But what I love about these is this just deepens. It's like layer after layer after layer with food, and reading these papers and hearing everything just really deepens. It just goes further and further and further. It's like there's no end to the depth and complexity of food in India. However, now this is something you might all take for granted, but just milk, is such a complex subject in this country. And I just jotted down some different things that were written about milk in these papers, because I don't think there simply cannot be another country in the world where milk is so complex. It's certainly not Australia. Australia does have a big dairy industry, but there's none of this complexity. So let me just, so it's mythological, it's religious, it's a sacred offering, and it's a consumer resource. It's socio-political, it's everyday, it's restricted, whether it's an imposed restriction, which we're going to hear about, or a self-imposed restriction with the new, people wanting to have, new milks, the alternative milks. It's ritual, it's devotion, it's purification, it's divinity, it's dude abhishek. Now that was something I didn't know. That's fascinating, with pouring the milk over people's cardboard cutouts. Definitely not something that happens in Australia. It's a dietary staple, it's a powerhouse of economic activity. Vinayak's going to talk about, it outpaces many tech juggernauts economically. It showcases the resilience and ingenuity of Indian society. It's the livelihood of millions, which we've certainly heard about over the last 2 days. It's cultural identity, it's political identity, whether that's good or bad, or class and caste associations, and there's an emerging concern for ethical consumption. That also then brings up questions about, again, economics. Who can afford to the ethical milk that's being offered out there? So they're just some of the things that I suppose, as an outsider, as an observer, that I pick up about how complex milk is in India. Fascinating. All right, so, and now we're going to hear 3 great papers, or 3 great presentations from the papers that the 3 finalists have submitted for the prize. So, Kuchika, you're going to go first.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kuchika Nath. I'm a PhD research scholar at IIT Kharagpur, and I'm working in food studies. My research deals with the culinary traditions of Bengali Hindu widows, and this is very much in my research ecosystem. So I'll present my paper here. So first I'll discuss the historical framework of widowhood in India. Why am I concentrating on Bengali Hindu widowhood? Why this micro community of Bengali Hindu widows? Because Bengal is traditionally a non-vegetarian state. It is historically a non-vegetarian state, and vegetarianism in Bengal does not necessarily depend on caste or religion of a person, as it depends in many other parts of India. But it curiously depends on widowhood. Especially upper caste women, when they become widows, these women are subjected to a codified social isolation that begins with food, and there are several markers of widowhood, such as the removal of vermilion from the parting of their hair, and they're made to wear a plain white sari without any borders, and these factors indicate the loss of auspiciousness. Widows are barred from entering any space of auspiciousness from any, although they are required to dedicate their life to divine purposes, to divinity. And these dietary restrictions become a means to inscribe chastity and social decorum on the widows, because protecting the honor of the family, and we have to remember that child marriage, we are talking about 19th and early 20th century Bengal, child marriage was still very prevalent in Bengal. Young women were married off to 80 years, to old men who were 80 years and above. So these men, when they used to die, the women were still very much children. So to protect the honor of the family, dietary restrictions become a way to control their bodies. And we all know that how food is a tool, how food is an instrument to control, for societal control through the control of body of women. And if we talk about the cultural context through culinary adaptation, so Bengali widowhood, the food customs aligned with the Bengali concept of niramish. And for lack of a better word, I have written vegetarian in bracket, but it is very different from the Indian concept of vegetarian. It connects closely to the concept of sattvic food that is prevalent nowadays, that has come into I would say practice nowadays. But how is it different from sattvic food? I shall discuss. So niramish entails that non-vegetarian food is a complete complete absence of non-vegetarian food, even the absence of alliums such as onion and garlic. And even red lentils or masoor dal, which are sources of high protein, these are considered impure or non-vegetarian. So I come back to the point where niramish food is not sattvic food, or widow's food. I shall discuss how widow's food is not sattvic food. Sattvic food, although several godmen kind of influencers preach it nowadays, it wasn't the norm in ancient India. It was a prescription, of course, for a very small part of India, only the northern plains. And in other parts of India, survival very much dictated what people ate, the temperature, and what food was available. So, and sattvic food is very much a choice, a privilege. The widow's fare was not. And I cannot talk about vegetarianism in Bengal without mentioning the Vaishnavas. They are a small sect of Hindus who worship Lord Vishnu, and they offered a cultural refuge for the widows who did not find that much discrimination that they faced inside their own homes. And these widows started culinary creativity within the confines of what they could eat, what they were permitted to eat. For example, I shall talk about 2 or 3 Bengali food items that form the basis of Bengali vegetarian cuisine that we talk about so much nowadays. Bengali, what most people do not know is Bengali vegetarian cuisine is a rich tradition of vegetarian food that was born out of a tragedy, and the tragedy is the widow's gastronomic violence that I like to call. So a simple item called doodh potol, and the item only consists of 2 ingredients that I just mentioned. Doodh is milk and potol is parval or pointed gourd. So with these, because vegetables were allowed for them to eat and dairy was not in the category of impermissible items, so they made do with whatever was available. And we should remember that to thicken the gravy, we use alliums such as onion, garlic, ginger paste and tomatoes nowadays. Though tomato was allowed to them, it was not a staple in the Bengali kitchen in 19th and early 20th century Bengal, because I shall discuss it further in my presentation, how food neophobia was very much real. Hobden and Pliner talks about food neophobia, the anxiety of new food items. And when tomatoes started coming in, the Bengalis, Bengalis of the older generation still call it biliti begun, or foreign eggplant. So so it's as foreign to them as other things. So they demonstrated this cultural negotiation and resilience with milk and milk products. Yogurt or curd, that was a permissible item that they could use to thicken their gravy. Shukto, which is a Bengali, I think if any of you have Bengali friends, the 2 or 3 items they'll introduce to, one of them will be shukto. And the gravy is not made out of onion or garlic. It is made out of poppy seed paste. It is made out of coconut milk or normal milk. Some households use it, and cashew paste, which also adds as a milk substitute. So when I talk about dairy and widowhood in Bengal, milk is a symbol of fertility, purity and spiritual nourishment, but it acts as a dichotomy when we talk about widows, because the widows had nothing closely, remotely related to fertility, and they were obviously, their family members were not looking to nourish their bodies. However, they represented chastity. and that chastity was only required to protect the family's honor. So this dairy's contradictory position reflected ambiguities around the widow's societal status. And Bengali Hindu widowhood and dairy is a strange marriage that exemplifies the tension between nourishment and renunciation. When I talk about food, gender, and social identity and its intersections, so there is a constant need to inscribe gendered expectations of purity in the female body. And Hindu nationalists, of course, in the present political climate, there has been a need to weaponize purity tropes. And there is an inseparability between womanhood and motherhood. And bovine bodies, the bodies of cows and buffaloes and goats, for example. However, cows have always been very dear to the Hindu religious framework. So bovine bodies are similarly positioned as to women's bodies as guardians of purity within the religious political framework. And both widows' and cows' bodies became ideological symbols of chastity and social order in this framework. And I shall now discuss what Frederick J. Simmons talk about. The cow represents motherhood and fertility in Indian culture, and there are three main principles of Hindu religious sacredness: samsara, which is the transmigration of the soul; karma; and dharma. Karma is the consequences of past actions, and dharma is a sacred duty that one should follow. Whatever be your dharma, you should follow it so that you can attain samsara. So purity is a central concept in dharma. Whatever is assigned to a person, individual rank is, for example, is determined by ritual status. And widows are positioned in a liminal space. They are chaste beings, but they cannot enter the space of auspiciousness. They even cannot enter the kitchens of the main kitchens of the household. Widows are assigned a separate kitchen even in their own families. And dairy products are purifiers. I shall discuss it in the next slides. Dairy products are purifiers. Milk, ghee, curd, these are purifiers. And these products transcend the caste-based pollutions, but can they transcend the inauspiciousness that we relegate the widows to that place? Can they transcend that position? So, dairy and ritual purity. Frederick J. Simmons talk about pollution in the Indian context, how pollution can happen through touch or ingestion. A person can touch you and an upper caste person can be polluted, or an upper caste person can consume a certain item cooked by a lower caste person, and pollution can be temporary or permanent. So, for the temporary, curiously again, very ridiculously, for the temporary pollution, milk's purificatory powers are very important here, because Andrea S. Wiley talks about milk's sacred role, and its key component of the Panchagavya, that is the 5 sacred cow products. So milk and ghee, they can purify any product. So there's this strange concept that if you take something that you're not supposed to take, milk and ghee can counter, it can cure that pollution, if I may. It's very ridiculous. And again, foods cooked with dairy could be offered to the gods, and since it's offered to the gods, the widows here could take it. Because it's prasad, they were not denied from it. And I shall now talk about the colonial and the regional culinary traditions. Portuguese influence in Bengal has been huge in terms of dairy, because earlier in Bengal, the curdle milk or the chana was not consumed, as people believed that if milk is curdled, that will anger the gods. But the Portuguese taught us the act of cheese making, the art of cheese making. So the Portuguese, and it has led to the development of iconic Bengali sweets such as Rasgulla, Chanar Payesh, and the rest. And the British introduction to tea has been huge, because the British introduced tea to us. Of course, there has been multiple politics behind it. They had to find a domestic market to sell tea, because after the Opium Wars, the Chinese market was off limits to them. So they began growing tea in India, and they also needed a domestic market in India. But Indians did not take to drinking tea as the British wanted them to drink tea. The Indian tea was basically milk and sugar boiled and then little tea leaves added to it, not the tea brewed separately like the British did, and milk and sugar added separately. So milk provided a huge, I would like to say that dairy consumption became huge after British introduced tea to us, and tea is a very important factor, will act as a very important factor in a primary text that I have chosen. And cultural ambivalence is there, because the widows could eat sweets because it is prasad, and no one can deny anyone of prasad. But then again, can the widows actually eat sweets out of their own wish? Because it's something very decadent. It's something like an indulgence. Were they allowed that indulgence? My primary texts are all cinema or all films. So dairy consumption in widowhood reflects broader socio-religious themes in literature and cinema. And food is a metaphor for austerity, chastity, and spiritual purity. And the films depict dairy as a ritual purifier once again, and contested indulgence for the widows. Literature and cinema offer insights on how food taboos enforce marginalization. They are already in a liminal space, and how they are further marginalized. And it is a call to all of us to interrogate, reimagine cultural traditions surrounding gender, food, and ritual purity. So my first film is Chokher Bali. It is an adaptation of Tagore's novel. It's a grain of sand, if you want me to translate it. It's Binodini is a young, she's a Western educated widow who experiments with chocolates and tea. And again, I shall return to my concept of food neophobia, or the crippling anxiety or fear, societal fear and anxiety of new food items, because she eats chocolates but hides them. There's this hesitation that will she accept the chocolate, will she eat it? But the English nun who hands her over the chocolate, she says there's no animal lard in it. You can safely consume it. But again, because it's a new food item, there's this hesitation that because they are not allowed indulgence. And again, tea. The widows of the family develop a habit of drinking tea together, and there's absolute shame regarding the act. And they drink tea, and they confess to God, that they ask for forgiveness of God, as if they are committing a sin. Although tea is not something that shouldn't be, that is a non-permissible item for the widows. And there's this moral anxiety that I just talked about. And the literary insight that I gained from it is food neophobia as a concept was very much ingrained within the widow's psyche as well, because they themselves struggle with self-indulgence. They, even within closed doors, they cannot bring themselves to eat something that is remotely indulgent. Oh, thank you. I'll just need 5 minutes. Thank you. So I'll just quickly wrap it up. In Shetpathuret Thala, Bondona, the protagonist, she eats frugal meals of rice, boiled plantains, and ghee, although it's an affluent upper caste home. And when her son falls sick, and then I have to remark here that they have a cow in their home, and they are an affluent family, and she is not served those foods. And when her son falls ill, because he cannot see her mother dressed like that, eating those kinds of food, there begins a conflict. That will she eat those food items for her son's well-being, or will she accept the society's dictums? I shall quickly move to Goinar Baksho. And I have dealt with widows, because widowhood is not a homogeneous identity. There are several intersections. So Rashmoni's control of her jewelry box is provides her that space that she's a wealthy widow, but she's still subjected to frugal meals of widows. And in not in one of these films do we see widows indulging themselves in meals that are rich in ghee, yogurt, or milk, for example. Not one. Although they were permitted to drink milk, do they actually drink milk? Do they actually eat any dairy products at all? I shall quickly move to Pother Panchali, and it's an upper caste Brahmin household, but they deal with abject poverty. And here we see the old frail lady. She has a separate kitchen of her own, and the widow's diet, curiously, is similar to the diet of all the other family members. Only the little boy Opu, he is given a glass of milk. Because in very poor households, no one can afford meals. So widow's food becomes similar to what everyone else is eating. And lastly, I shall deal with a migrant widow's crisis. Indubala herself, in Indubala Bhater Hotel, Indubala is a migrant widow who is teased and called refugee several times in the course of the film. It's actually a TV series, but and after her husband's death, they are left with debt. And she realizes that until she consumes non-vegetarian items, she won't be able to be the primary breadwinner of the family. So it leads us to the realization that livelihood is at the root of it. If a person has to go to work, she cannot afford to consume what is given to her. So these are my concluding slides. This is my penultimate slide. So purity and pollution is shaped by anxieties of social and ritual impurity and the absence. There's a stark absence of milk. And although these widows have curiously created their own cuisine with the help of milk, and I have to remind everyone here that milk is not only dairy milk. Coconut milk or alternative sources of milk was very prevalent in Bengali cuisine. And acts of culinary resistance, I've already discussed it, how widows, they did not take what was given to them. They made elaborate cuisines out of it. And in my concluding slide, I would like to wrap it up by saying that cinematic narratives highlight how food practices both reinforce and challenge widowhood's social construction, and the agency of the widows is reflected through their engagement with dairy in addition to their permitted food items, and it symbolizes defiance and survival. And in the broader implication, we see that food becomes the language of autonomy, creativity, and cultural resistance within Bengal's socio-cultural landscape. Thank you for your attention. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course, during coffee. Please also feel free to offer me any suggestions that you may have.
Thank you. I find that was just so interesting. Vinayak, you going to go next?
Hi everybody, I am Vinayak Mehta and I'm a filmmaker by profession, but today I do not have 2 hours to sort of tell my story on milk. However, the way that this story is, this is about exclusion and innocence. My entire paper revolves around these 2 words, and I would like to begin by saying that milk is scarce in our country. If you disagree, I will take you to the end of the presentation to debate on that topic, whether that's subjective or literal. The White River runs long and deep in all grades of purity and in all forms of consumption. Milk is myth, money, and madness. How? We shall go forward in this paper and discover all the 3 aspects of milk that I find most interesting and most relevant at this point in our country. When we start churning milk in my presentation, we'll talk about 3 basic topics, which is Samudra Manthan, national identity, and Pal Abhishekam. Samudra Manthan is churning of the ocean. It's a myth that recounts the epic struggle between Devas and Asuras. It still exists in today's day and age. the Asuras and the Devas have changed. National identity, white ink, green paper. It is going to be a macro look at the revenue that's generated by milk in all forms combined. I would like you to pay attention to the numbers that we actually churn out. Pal Abhishekam is a societal need for heroes, figures who can embody hope, aspiration, and the promise of a better life. There would be some heroes you would remember or recognize as I move forward. Samudra Manthan is a major episode. It is an episode in the Vishnu Purana. When the churning happened, there were 14 Ratnas that came out of that churning. One Ratna is very important today, which is Kamadhenu. Kamadhenu is a cow. It's a divine cow that granted any wish and provided endless milk. India has a Kamadhenu. Gods and demons united in their labor, churning the ocean with Mount Mandara as their pivot and the serpent Vasuki as their rope. This mirrors the milk's role as a universal sustainer, even in myth and in reality. Sustenance is a shared human experience. As the myth unfolds, we witness the cunning of Vishnu's Mohini, who tricks the Asuras, ensuring that only the gods partake of the divine nectar. Here is where exclusion in our country begins. The critical question that I ask all of you is that not every food item has a symbolic benefit. Here it does. Here milk has a symbolic benefit. But there are many items across our country that we consume that have no symbolic benefit. They do not have the pressure to be consumed. Whether it's a Thursday, it's a Tuesday, whether it's a certain festival, those items are untouched and sacrosanct. However, milk has a lot of pressure on its shoulders. We come to Pal Abhishekam, and Pal Abhishekam is a process of bathing of the divinity. We see on my left is Rajnikant, a very popular South actor. He was one of the first documented South stars that was bathed in milk. One actor before was the senior South actor MGR, who then later became a politician, who also was bathed in milk. However, the debate on which South actor was first as well, not even solved by Pushpa. But the same fans that offer milk to Rajnikant were often kids that never had access to milk on their own. So when I'm talking also about Pal Abhishekam, I would also like to tell you that I'm also an artist, and I exhibited in Golcha Cinema in Jaipur at the end of January recently. And I was part of that theatre, and I was walking in that theatre. I saw this big cutout, and it was of this actor, Sonu Sood, and his film was coming out. And I asked him, I said, I don't see these posters in Delhi anymore. It's very rare that I see them, but it's very interesting. And the theatre manager, second generation, and he told me, when I see these cutouts, and it was always fun because when we were coming back from school, we would see the cutout first, the legs are there. You build the cutout from the bottom to the top. So we always used to wonder, who is the actor? Who is the ultimate star that's going to be? It would be revealed to them as and when they kept on going to school. So bunking school was not an option for some people. But in a sense, we dress our gods with scarcity and not abundance. People say that we dress our gods with milk. It's abundant, with cash, with gold, with silver. I would like to start saying that milk is scarce because of certain reasons I would like to mention later on in terms of access. We should rectify this because milk is not available to each citizen in our country, and it should be labeled as scarce. Basic nutrition is birthright. So this is 6 decades of milk production from the 1960s to 2020, and it's gone in a very healthy way, because in the 60s and 70s we had a 46%, just bouncing off numbers here. In the 70s we had 36%, in the 80s 66%, in 2000s 50%, in 2000 to 2010 61%, and till now we have reached at an average of 82% of growth in milk. So there's a lot of milk. These are the state-wise major breeds that we have. UP is the top producer of milk as of now. We also have 2 breeds each across the states. Apologies for my pronunciation, but we have Murrah, we have Sahiwal, we have Raithi, we have Gir, we have Neeli Ravi. Sahiwal again, Gir, Kankraj, Kangayam, and Jersey, which is a hybrid. Even Holstein, but it's not that common. Why do I say that the dairy industry has arm twisted the country in all aspects of milk? Is part of legality, bureaucracy, consumption, greed, and corruption. Are there any politicians here? Good. Um, why do I believe that national identity? So India churns about 210 million metric tons of milk each year. Operation Flood began in the 1970s. If we were producing the amount of milk we produce now, we can fill the entire dam, which is the largest dam in India, which is the Indira Sagar Dam in Madhya Pradesh. It stores about 12.22 billion cubic meters of water. So if you were producing the amount of milk we're producing right now, it would take the dam 55 years to be filled up to the brim with milk. This year is the year it would be completely filled if we were producing it from the 1970s. The average decade-on-decade growth for milk has been about 57%. The annual revenue is upwards of 133 billion. These are the three major players that we have across India. Here's just for numbers. Here's how much India produces in terms of revenue in milk. Monthly, it produces 66,000 crores. Weekly, it produces 15,000 crores. And daily, it produces revenue of 2,000 crores. The cup is overflowing at this point. Here is the bifurcation between curd, paneer, and cheese. The amount of revenue that's pulled in by these subsets of milk. By the way, I said scarcity and I said milk is scarce. However, when I look at my own presentation, I feel that, well, the requirement is about 154 billion liters, which is quite enough for 1.4 billion people. 221 billion liters of milk is what we produce annually, so I don't know what am I complaining about. However, milk is also a class issue. Recently, there was a story, there's a temple in Tamil Nadu where a Dalit was not allowed to go inside and offer milk to his god. He had milk, the devotee had milk, but he was not allowed. What if that Dalit at that point was not allowed? He may then fulfill going to that same Rajnikant cutout and offer milk to another divinity. Maybe that has more access. Maybe that is why we need idols at that point. Because the idols that we have created or we have prayed under have not been loyal to us in terms of access. Whether it is with people who have taken charge at taking care of those idols, or in general the way religion works. So here's what we can skim from the profits of milk, because a lot of people might tell me that, oh, you don't know how the milk industry works. We are making so much money. Here's the revenue that we have. This revenue goes into employment. This revenue goes into paying salaries, buying new equipment. Okay, I agree. Can I take something from your profits? As I earlier mentioned, there's no politician here. I'm assuming that about 30% of the total industry revenue is adequate to about 5,000 billion in 2024. If we consider an average effective tax rate of 25% on these profits, assuring a profit margin of 10% of the taxable income, 569 billion, we would have, well, stopping you here again. I said milk is scarce because according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, India has one of the highest rates of child malnutrition in the world, with nearly 38% of children under 5 being stunted due to inadequate nutrition. We can't complete nutrition with just milk. Of course, we are not novices here who think milk can provide ultimate nutrition. It cannot. This is why I wanted to take something from the prophets. Let's flunk malnutrition for kids now. If one thing we need to fail, malnutrition needs to fail. It needs to be suspended from the education system of milk. With a tax revenue of 142 billion out of the 500 billion I spoke of earlier, approximately 5.69 crore children could be provided with an adequate nutrition at an estimated cost of 2,500 rupees per child every year. If all of them can be fed with just the profits from milk in a year in our country, I don't know what is stopping us to not have this be an ancient thought. We have left our gods in those thoughts. We have transformed into putting milk from a brass or a gold symbol of God to a paper cutout. I think we can adapt to this as well. And to finish off, because I know Charmaine is looking at me, and I still have 5 minutes. Okay, great. Um, well, I'm also a filmmaker, but also an editor, so I think manage time quite well. Um, when I was in school, I was taken to a milk factory in India, and in Delhi. Can't name the factory, um, uh, but just because it's just better to leave certain labels out, but can't name the factory. However, I went there as a kid and I tried the milk that was there from this big silo, and all of us were there, and we had this little, and then it was taken into those steel cylinders which have tea often in weddings. So I just had that milk, and I immediately, when I tasted that milk, I immediately was like, oh, this doesn't taste like home. This does not taste like milk I get at home. Something about it was very fresh, very pure, and of course, Srivastava was here before me talking about how milk is usually 6 to 8 days old in our country across. And that is what hit me. And as a child, you don't think of change because you're not a fake politician who will later on say that I thought of change as a child. As a child, you only feel about feelings. You only feel about something affected you. And it affected me, and I thought, this does not taste like home. That was 15 years ago. I hope today I've done something about it. I've done something, I've made some sort of a change in what I felt as a kid. The challenge ahead lies in ensuring that this emblem of sustenance becomes a bridge of inclusivity. It's rather than a barrier of exclusion in a society where the white river trickles down to every corner. The hope is that it flows, nourishes all, transcending the divide that has long separated us. At the end of this, I would like to open this for questions later on, and I wanted to go through a lot of things, but I also wanted to make sure that every part of my presentation also goes through all of you and important points. Once again, I would like to thank Om, Tanushree, Sankalp, Ruth, and the extended ICA team and the jury for selecting me and this opportunity, and especially Charmaine. We also had a lot of tea and discussion over this, so thank you so much. And thank you everyone that's present here. That's my time. Thank you. Oh yeah, and pasteurization is basically when I've sterilized myself and made a change happen. So, sorry, as a filmmaker, forgot the ending. Thank you.
I'm sure people will have questions for you over the break. Yeah. All right, Sana, welcome our third panelist.
Hi, I'm Sonakshi. I work as a senior writing tutor at Ashoka University, but I'm also a food writer. And this year's ICA theme allowed me to merge my first two loves, which is basically writing and writing about food, and allowed me to think about milk in the most intimate way possible, which is a woman's body and breastfeeding. So I'll quickly begin with a quote from my favorite anthropologist, Mary Douglas, who writes in her essay, Deciphering a Meal, food as she writes, if food is treated as a code, the message it encodes will be found in the patterns of social relations being expressed. The message is about different degrees of hierarchy, inclusion and exclusion, boundaries and transactions across the boundaries. Like sex, talking of food has a social as well as a biological component. So just to objectively correlate, we've all grown up fed on these images, and we still continue to be fed these images. So these are just three, and I have another three for you to reflect on. Again, just a reflection, and then you'll know why I did what I did. So, woman is food because breast milk is human beings' first nourishment, the one food essential for survival. Moreover, and milk is the first complete food that nourishes human beings, that is first also tasted by them. In that, milk is elemental. However, is milk neutral? So, just for this paper, I had Mahashweta Devi's story Jashoda. She is the titular protagonist of Standayani, or the breast giver, and I also rely on my methodology is Cedia Hartman's critical confabulation. So before I begin that, I imagined Jashoda walking into the Haldar family, for which she is the professional mother, and bowing down to a portrait. So I write, Jashoda walks into the Haldar household and stands arrested by the sight of a portrait. The concept of the portrait is not alien, but a common one at that. So much so that it populates almost every Hindu household in the vicinity, every sweetmeat shop in the area. What is this universal conception of a portrait then? It is the portrait of a toddler Krishna, the human avatar of Lord Vishnu, clinging onto Yashodhara, his foster mother. He holds a small glass in his hand, suggesting that he is hungry. He stands close to Yashodhara, almost inseparable from her body. Yashodhara, on the other hand, is milking a cow. We cannot see the face of the cow, but know that it is one, since it is white and very healthy. Milk flows down effortlessly from her udders, and nothing in the portrait betrays her restlessness. She too emerges as a monument of patience, much like Yashodhara. This is a vision of fertility, of abundance. Jashoda abandons herself and bows down in reverence. But who is she bowing down to? Her namesake, Krishna, or the symbol of fertility and life, the cow? The three are chained, and literally and metaphorically, their divinity fluid flowing into one another. And Jashoda aligns and claims part of this divinity by becoming the professional mother for the Haldar household. Devi's decision to name her protagonist Jashoda may be intentional. Even if this decision were to be contested, the moniker's self-contained reference and reverence are hard to be lost on the reader. There's a tapping into the Indian reader's psyche that conjures up associative images of bhakti or devotion, of nostalgia that romanticizes motherhood, of Krishna with his makhan or butter, and the cows. The narrative, too, is sufficiently peppered with explicit references that exploit the unerring emotions and images of devotion to the maternal body, the most excessive being that of the breast, and by its association, the milk, the fluid that sustains Jashoda's position as a professional mother. When I had first read The Breast Giver, I had been a little indifferent to the name or the protagonist. It was an obvious giveaway. The ending of the story certainly came as a surprise. If Raja Ravi Verma's painting offers a romanticized portrayal of maternal abundance, Mahashweta Devi's The Breast Giver presents its harsh, exploitative underbelly. Jashoda, unlike the serene Yashodhara, embodies a reality where the maternal body is endlessly consumed by social and economic necessity. However, what continued to intrigue me was the comparison of Jashoda to the mother cow and not her namesake Yashodhara, the foster mother of Krishna. A close reader, the silence was deafening, and as a lecturer teacher, I had to bridge this gap, and so I resorted to Cedia Hartman's conception of critical confabulation. Just to give a brief context to what critical confabulation actually is, Hartman uses critical confabulation as a technique to recover and reimagine incomplete or suppressed narratives, particularly those that belong to marginalized groups or are hidden due to the excess of witnesses or archival material. She develops this approach in her influential essay, Venus in Two Acts, where she confronts the challenges of reconstructing the erasure around the deaths of two black women aboard a slave ship during the notorious Middle Passage. In seeking to reclaim these obscure stories, Hartman advocates for a method of reading archives that mimics the symbolic dimensions of history itself. This process allows her to tell an impossible story and highlight the impossibility by its telling, while simultaneously envisioning what could have been. By placing her narrative approach at the intersection of past and future, Hartman resists offering a cathartic resolution for readers, instead underscoring the enduring impacts of historical violence on the present. While repairing the life of the girls aboard the ship, Hartman claims that the archive of slavery rests upon a founding violence. This violence determines, regulates, and organizes the kinds of statements that can be made about slavery, as well as it creates subjects and objects of power. Here, I tweak Hartman's words to confabulate mine. The archive of breastfeeding rests upon a founding violence, and this violence determines, regulates, and organizes the kinds of statements that can be made about breastfeeding, and as well it creates objects and subjects of power. Busy preserving the progeny of the Haldar household, as a regular milk mother, we as readers do not gain access into Jashoda's interiority as she nurses the babies. One is unable to sharpen focus on her pain, if any, since a grammar of milky excess surrounds her. In her ability as a wet nurse, Jashoda is as capable as a cow, and this brings me back to my initial question, why is Jashoda never revered as Yashodhara, but the mother cow? I'm reminded also of my personal experience in grade 1. Too young to register the political significance, we knew of Hindi as our mother tongue, and the most significant memory that rears its head occasionally since then is of a home assignment. We had to write an essay on Gai, cow. And the first sentence that I remember writing was, Gai hamari mata hai. Something that was repeated by my brother 13 years later. The one thing that had changed was, he added another line, गायों की हत्या करना अपराध है. What continued to stay consistent was the assigning of cow as the national mother. Nearly 200 children in grade 1 were churning out this sentence each year, and they persist now. Cow is no longer an animal, she is Gau Mata, a holy mother, and we have been her children since. The image of the cow as my mother does not stop here. In retrospect, an undulated exposure to aggressive marketing techniques via billboards and television advertisements further solidified the notion of the cow as my mother and my mother as a cow. For example, Amul's tagline, Amul doodh peeta hai India, India drinks Amul milk, and Namaste India's catchline, Yug badla hai sanskar nahi. The era has changed, not the tradition. May appear harmless at first, but these embody a notion of milk nationalism, which is rendered complete in the very invocation of Mother Dairy, a wholly owned subsidiary of the National Dairy Development Board. I'm yet to see a invocation of Father Dairy sometime soon. In fact, Amul's tagline bears an emotional ring to Tata Salt's Desh Ka Namak, the salt of the country. Salt, as a symbol of fidelity, is reiterated here, hinting at the construction of a loyal Indian identity, and Amul's tagline too works under a similar logic, hoping to ignite a stream of unified national consciousness. So, just for example, the association between cow and Indian mothers is not a new one. Yamini Narayanan in Mother Cow, Mother India, and Charu Gupta in The Icon of Mother in late colonial North India have traced the construction of nationalism via the female body. I'm reminded of Narayanan's encounter with an undercow cow activist, and the activist was armed, and the sight of the gun had made Narayanan squeamish. Her face betrayed her fear, prompting the vigilante to ask her, why won't you use a gun to save your mother? Are you saying you will not use a gun to save your mother? So this is one. I actually thought that I'll use these videos, but I couldn't embed them. But just to give a brief and contextualize, the first is a link from Facebook. But if you just quickly Google Hindi movie dialogues with Gai ka doodh or maa ka doodh piya hai, you will come up with this. I mean, this would be probably one of the first two results that Facebook will throw up at you. And the other is actually a small snippet from Hey Baby, a 2007 movie, which I think most of us will be familiar with. And it tries to evoke humor when we see Akshay Kumar lost in a mall trying to find out what is a good formula food for the baby that had just appeared at his doorstep. And he asked, where do we find breast milk? So, I mean, this is also very telling of the ignorance of men and how they also distance themselves from caring for babies and children right from the very start. And the other is taken from an Instagram post, which I can just like read and then maybe translate. माँ के दूध का कर्ज और बाप के पसीने का मोल कभी चुकाया नहीं जा सकता. Basically, again, you putting or signifying that a mother's value is just limited to the milk that she provides. And the binary between nature and nurture also becomes very evident through this quote. So this is again an image of the holy cow. I am sorry I couldn't enlarge it, but in it are inscribed the 84 deities from Hinduism. I wasn't aware that we have so many deities, but yes, all the 84 are inscribed there. And the one with the sword is actually an alien body, mostly thought of to be a Muslim. The other is Kamdhenu, and you can see that this is very much a description or a visualization of the maternal body. So the maternal body, the mother, the human mother, and the cow actually collapse into one here, and we have the Kamdhenu in its very form. The other image that I have here is of the Bishnoi community, and just to elaborate on my point of milk nationalism, that is also how they, just by understanding or just by looking at this photo, you would know that why Bishnois are so protective of the deer, the black bucks, because they are out to seek revenge of the mother's milk that has been fed to the non-human animal here. So there's also by Gupta. Gupta highlights a critical distinction where the cow surpasses the human mother in desirability. The cow's mute and compliant nature makes it a more manageable and sacred figure, as it does not protest or challenges patriarchal structures. In fact, this comparison recalls to one's mind the popular Hindi idiom for a submissive woman where she is likened to a cow. She is Gai Jaisi Seedhi, as simple as a cow. In contrast, the physical mother's ability to think or speak diminishes her perceived sacredness. The glorification of the cow and maternal figures was primarily aimed at promoting an ideal of strong Hindu masculinity, the responsibility to protect Gaumata and by extension the Hindu women, and thereby the nation fell on Hindu men. Women's breasts are congruent to cows' udders and became extended metaphors of nourishment and sustenance. Gupta highlights the connection through a violent vocabulary, and I quote, "Milk flowed from both, and both signified a domestic space where no outside invasion or penetration could be tolerated." With the maternal flowing into the bovine, communal divisions cracked open, and the female body of the human and the animal continues to be strategically employed in nationalist narratives to both idealize and commodify nurturing bodies within patriarchal frameworks. In Mahashweta Devi's text, Jashoda willingly accepts her fate as a domesticated cow. She wants to become the earth and feed her crippled husband and helpless children with a fulsome harvest. And I cannot help but think of another instance that happened in 2021 when I was an MPhil scholar at IPU, and we were asked to register for the Kamdhenu Gau Vigyan Prachar Prasar examination, which was organized by the Rashtriya Kamdhenu Ayog, constituted by the Government of India. And the underlying principle of the exam was to infuse the curiosity into all Indians about the cows and make them aware of the unexplored potential and business opportunities a cow can offer even after it stops giving milk. I was shocked, but then I also came to know of the underlying violence, something that Narayanan also mentions in her chapter, aptly titled Milking. She writes how cows have no protection as long as she has even one drop of milk left in her, and she also points out the gender politics that plays out in dairy farms, where male calves deprived of their mother's milk are left to die emaciated. The violence at the dairy farm mirrors the violence that Jashoda's body is subjected to with the use of artificial insemination, and here with the continuous pregnancy, so that she is able to produce milk for the Haldar household. I hearken to Hartzman's concept that I had critically confabulated again to bring to your attention the archive of breastfeeding rests upon a founding violence, and this violence determines, regulates, and organizes the kinds of statements that can be made about breastfeeding, and as well, it creates subjects and objects of power. Just to quickly end, this is data why India is not a breastfeeding nation, and it also, while I was reading and while I was completing this paper, I also got to know that there are a lot of other instances that I mentioned in my paper. One, which explicitly talk about gender inequality, where right after a woman becomes a mother, it becomes extremely difficult for her to continue working because of lack of nursing rooms in offices. And these emerge as pain points, which popular economists also talk about. So that was one, and I also mentioned two instances of my own friends, and one particular where I had to appear as I was in an interview with a DU college, and I overheard two other colleagues talking about how one of their colleagues had to drop out and resign because the college refused to give her maternity leave. She was on ad hoc basis. Again, this was precarious. She was already precarious, and then motherhood made her position more precarious. So, in being forced to give up their aspirations, the romanticized notion of motherhood is also challenged. And these pain points also underscore a host of anxieties that assail mothering bodies. Are they going to be a good mother if they continue working? Are they going to be a good mother if they cannot breastfeed? Are they going to be a good mother if they rely on formula food? Which is also one aspect that I tackle in my paper. So with this, I think I can just 5 minutes or 2 minutes quickly. Okay. So patriarchal at heart, the fear of breastfeeding in public spaces, the fear of being gazed at, the fear of being fetishized also keeps new mothers away from actively taking part in the public sphere. In their role as mothers, they are relegated to the home, their consumption complete under the patriarchal order. And this, again, I'm reminded of Mandakini, the famous actress, whom all of us would be familiar with from Ram Teri Ganga Maili. She actually collapses the two ideas, the fetishization of women's bodies and breastfeeding, into one, when she just says that my breastfeeding scene in Ram Teri Ganga Maili was pure form, unlike today's skin show. So my research led me to the promising presence of breast milk banks in India, to the knowledge that Odisha government has directed senior officials to establish breastfeeding cabins in offices and public spaces. However, the arrival at these points of hope was painful. A literary document allowed me to navigate this milky yet tricky route, where I was inclined to think that breastfeeding is only completely free if women's labor and time are not valued. So I think of redemption points right now, of nursing empathetic futures closely relating to what Hartman calls furtive communication, those fleeting glances of assurance as gestures of care between women in the folds of the city, of the village, within the metro, the shuttle, the workplace, and the bathroom. Thank you so much.